crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But Jesus said to him, "Friend, who set me to be judge or arbitrator over you?" And then he said to them, "Take care, be on guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." And then Jesus told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly. And he thought to himself, "Well, what should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." And then he said, "I'll do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please have a seat. May God's grace and peace be with you all this day. So it's summertime, getting later in the summer. It got me thinking, with the event going on up near where we live now, the Mid-State California Fair, about how as a kid growing up on a farm, have I ever mentioned that I grew up on a farm for some of you? I tend not to talk about it when my brother's here, because if I say something about how hard I worked, I might get contradicted. But for farm kids, somehow those fairs, the county ones where you might have an animal showing, but even bigger was the state fair. And that was sort of the great summer cultural event of youth, it seemed to me. So for weeks before this wondrous event that would take place, usually this week in August or a couple weeks, it was really all that I could think about. As kids, we had spent the weeks before the fair sitting on a blanket out on our front yard selling sweet corn to the people who stopped by after seeing our hand-painted sign. And in fact, besides fresh sweet corn, some years it would include the words "free puppies." So it was sort of a cooperative advertising ploy by my mom to sell sweet corn and by Dad to diminish our puppy supply. Between the dog and the sweet corn lovers, it meant there was a pretty steady flow of customers. And well, even though we only charged something like 35 cents a dozen for the sweet corn, you might not think you could get rich, but by the end of 3 weeks or so, I'd have a cache of quarters that weighed heavy in my pockets and made a great clinking sound if I carried them around with me. And even if Dad thought he maybe should have, at least seen a little of the profits, we usually employed some creative bookkeeping to make sure that the middlemen kept the greatest share. So I doubt that Dad ever saw enough to even pay for the seed. But the stakes were high, saving money for the fair, and I knew I'd need every bit of it. So, of course, needed some money for the rides. That was always important. The tilt-a-whirls and octopi, I'm not sure how do you say that, especially the double Ferris wheel, where from its height you could see the whole midway and beyond. Of course, you needed some quarters for the fine food items, the corn dogs and snow cones and cream puffs. That was big at the Wisconsin State Fair. Now those newer ones like breaded deep fried Snickers, you got to have some money for those things. Also, some of the money, of course, was needed for the special exhibits that they always had from different natural wonders from around the world. See the biggest bull in the world. And then the barker would add, seeing some of us rural types in the audience, how would you like to clean up his stall? Or there are the amazing tiny 3-foot tall horses of South America. There is a stand devoted to Bigfoot, the mysterious Yeti of the Pacific Northwest, alive, just 50 cents. That's 5 thin dimes, 1/2 of a dollar. How could you refuse? How could one think of pinching pennies when there were these rare educational opportunities that were available only at the fair? In fact, there were some other educational exhibits as well that I wanted to attend as a kid. They usually had to do with cultural dances from around the world, but the sign said you had to be 18 to get into those. So there are always a few games, of course, games of chance as well that, given my natural dexterity and athletic prowess, at least that's what the guy at the stand said that I possessed, that this game would be a cinch for me. And so I had to give them a try. And then, of course, there was this whole building at the State Fair that was devoted, to the sorts of wonders. I guess this was that until the advent of late night cable TV and infomercials that you could only see at fairs. So there might be, like, for example, the wondrous vacuum cleaner that was powerful enough to suck up a bowling ball. Although why you would want to do that was never quite clear to me. If you had a vacuum like that in your house, you can imagine you'd be sucking up books and down comforters and whole potted plants in one swipe. There are the miracle rug cleaners that promise to get up even that stain from the time you took care of your friend's Great Dane in 2007. They had these knives that could cut through sheet metal in case the need arose before you'd put them on your table for your guests to use with your special Cajun blackened fish lips. And then there was the latest version, almost every year it seemed like, of the Veg-O-Matic. And my dad was a sucker for those. They were great for, my mom's birthday or a wedding anniversary. In other words, the whole of the fair was this place just brimming with treasures. Problem was, after those rides and games and food, even though I'd been saving up for all those weeks, it would end up almost inevitably that I would not have enough quarters left for something I really wanted. That's the other inevitable part of this. Every year I would go to the fair as a kid, I'd see something that I simply had to have. Something so rare and cool and completely unforeseen that until I happened to come across it at the fair, I simply hadn't realized how incomplete my life was without it until that moment. Now, I can't seem to remember just what it was in any given year at the fair. I remember one year, though, it was like a really cool Robin Hood hat with a feather in it. Another year, a sword with precious jewels in the hilt. Or one year, a genuine silver bracelet on which you could have your name inscribed, right there while you waited. Whatever it happened to be, I needed it. I had to have it. And of course, I didn't have the money to get it. Now, if the younger sisters were along, I might be able to convince them that it was somehow in their interest that I acquire this rare treasure. Since Mom, who was the soft touch in the family, never came to the fair, it was usually Dad that I had to try to work on. I remember one year, the treasure at stake was a watch. And it was a very special watch. One that even I figured my dad should have been able to appreciate its rare and edifying even spiritual significance, because besides being intricately made and with a real leatherette band on it, in place of the usual numbers 1 through 12, this watch had the name of the 12 disciples. Think of it. Every time you used it, when you looked at it, it would be like going to church. I mean, how could that be denied? But, of course, just as inevitable as the supplications about how I needed this, how I had to have this, how it would be such a good thing, the reply came back, you'll live without it. Well, yeah, I suppose I could live without it, but life would be much more worth living knowing and having this thing. I could live without it, but think how much better life would be if I lived with it. I argued with Dad, but he was probably preoccupied with getting another one of those veggie destructors for my mom so she could add it to the warehouse of them she had down in the basement. Well, it was at that point that I'd just give up, kind of sit down on a bench, start to sulk, thinking about the unfairness of the universe and dads whose sense of life and death matters were so out of touch with the kids. That's when I'd start to watch the people walking around. Hey, there's a kid with one of those great Robin Hood hats. He must have better parents than me. And as I watch the people, maybe you do this too if you go to the fair, you can't help but wonder, at least in some cases, like, who are these people? Where do they come from? Where do they live? And, well, what brings them here? What are they looking for, searching for? And the truth is, I still wonder as I watch people going about their busyness each day. I guess as I watch myself on the midway of life, just what am I looking for? What's that treasure that I need or think I need? Not sure I've changed all that much. I don't go to fairs as much as I used to. And I guess my sense of what constitutes a great cultural event has shifted at least a little bit, broadened a bit. And I think even at my age, I'm not all that different. There are still things appearing on the horizon of life at one place or another, or one time or another, that I somehow still get this feeling or become convinced that somehow I simply have to have this to truly be happy, to be complete and fulfilled and successful. Some of you at other stages in your life, well, those are real feelings. It isn't now my stage, I guess, always some material possession. Maybe that's a kind of progress of sorts. If that needful thing, the treasure, is defined, well, as an experience or the knowledge that comes from it. I suppose it's progress if acquiring a particular degree or an advancement in a job is what becomes important, something you strive for. It certainly is some kind of improvement if what we seek that's going to make things right or complete us is another person, a relationship rather than a thing. But, well, then even that, according to Jesus, can easily be misdirected and somehow lead us astray because, well, he talks about there's one needful thing, and that one thing is really no thing at all. It's not something you can get, but only something you can receive. It's not something you can control or make happen, but it is something that can happen to you. It's what Jesus called God's kingdom. Anything less than that, if it becomes our focus in life, well, becomes an idol. And if you stake your life on it, it will break your heart in the end. That treasure, well, maybe we experience it differently, different understandings of what that kingdom embodies. Maybe that's why only something as big as God can be the one truly needful thing, the thing that can give our lives meaning, that can fill the empty place inside and complete us in truth, in the sense of making us whole. Where your treasure, where your heart is, there your treasure is also, Jesus once said. Maybe that one thing, that deepest treasure of all, is to be given a heart, a human and humane heart, a compassionate heart, perhaps even a holy heart. Because whatever else it is, the kingdom of God that Jesus speaks of, teaches, tells stories about, it's not a formula, but a way of life, a way of living with God and perhaps somehow even for God, the way that Jesus lived, even at the cost of his own life. For Jesus is himself, of course, the embodiment of God's kingdom of grace. The story of his life becomes the disclosure of God's life with us and for us. And according to St. Paul, it is a promise, a treasure so great that nothing at all, not even death, can separate us from it. This is the needful thing, the precious treasure that will not break our hearts. Oh, and by the way, that watch with the disciples on it, well, I finally got one on the internet. I put it away somewhere for safekeeping, and if I find it, you can come and have a look at it. Well, for 50 cents, that's 5 thin dimes, 2 quarters. Amen.